Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adriana Proser, the John H. Foster Senior Curator of Traditional Asian Art at Asia Society, and I hope you're all feeling incredibly energized and excited about another session this afternoon for this wonderful symposium. I also want to thank Oscar and Agnes Tang for and the Tang Center for their support and collaboration on this symposium and also the accompanying exhibition. It's so great to be together with all of you to talk about this really exciting material. The focus of our session this afternoon is the cargo, much more specifically. I think that this morning really laid out for us a really a fine sense of the context and the historical context which is behind the ship and the shipwreck during the Tang period. We'll look at more kinds of more specific case studies this afternoon. I cannot guarantee that you're going to have the same kind of olfactory experiences that you had this morning, however, but I'm sure that our speakers for this afternoon have something interesting up their sleeves, and we are really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. Our first speaker this afternoon is Victor Mair. He is Professor Emeritus at the University.
No way.
No?
I'm still teaching very much.
Okay. Agnes. I thought. Sorry about that.
I'm not an emeritus.
It's okay.
I won't be emeritus forever.
Okay. I apologize. I heard misinformation about your retirement earlier.
I'll never retire.
Okay. Let me try that again. Just blank all that out of your mind. Victor Mair is professor at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in Buddhist popular literature as well as the vernacular tradition of Chinese fiction and the performing arts. He has been a fellow or visiting professor at prestigious institutions, including the University of Hong Kong, the Institute of Advanced Study, the Institute of Research in Humanity, and the Institute for Research in the Humanities at Kyoto University. He is most popularly known for his interdisciplinary research on the Bronze Age and Iron Age mummies of Eastern Central Asia. This resulted, among other things, in 3 documentaries for television and a major international conference, numerous articles, and the book, The Tarim Mummies. A prolific scholar and with wide-ranging interests, Professor Mair is also founder and editor of the Sino-Platonic Papers and general editor of the ABC Chinese Dictionary series at the University of Hawaii Press. His book, co-written with Erling Hong, The True History of Tea, was published in 1998, and I think some of his interests in tea may be mentioned in the upcoming talk. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mair.
Thank you, Adriana. I'll make some more corrections too. I think that book came out in 2008 or 9, The True History of Tea. I was working on it in 1998. Actually, I worked on that history of tea for 30 years. And I'll cut right to the quick. I'm obsessed with one item in the cargo. And I'll have to tell you how and why I became obsessed with it. There are 60,000 pieces, more than 60,000. But one of them really captured my attention. And I worked very hard on it for a couple months, one item. Because in the True History of Tea, the book, I wanted to account for all the words in the world that are for tea. And I usually would have, like an audience like this, I would ask everybody to tell me all the words for tea that they know of in many different languages. And it would always turn out, I could trace them back to Chinese. Does anybody speak Hungarian here? No? Well, okay, Hungarian is erbata. But that's really herb tea. So and tea, of course, goes back to Chinese through Hokkien, te. And cha, which we now know cha in English because we say masala cha, right? Masala tea. But Indians and Vietnamese and Koreans, they use the word cha. And that's a Mandarin thing. So I wanted to figure out in this book, where exactly did all the words for tea in the world come from? And I found, after much labor, almost a year of just working on the words for tea and the character for tea in Chinese, that they all can be traced back to Sinitic Chinese, except one. And the Chinese word goes back to that word. And so in the course of this lecture, I will reveal which the word for tea is. And if I forget, ask me during the question and answer period. Am I too close to the?
No, you're not, but I left something here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right. I'm a scholar of medieval Chinese vernacular literature and language and literature. And I also work on medieval Buddhist texts. And then during the 90s and first decade of the 2000s, I got wrapped up in an archaeology project that Adriana referred to, the mummies of Central Asia. So how did I get wrapped up in tea? Well, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nepal, and I loved to drink British-style tea that was served by the wayside. And in the winter, it would warm me up like a furnace in my stomach. In the summer, it would make me perspire and cool me down. Really hot tea. So as a Midwesterner from Ohio who didn't drink much tea, almost none, maybe a little bit of iced tea when I was in high school, I became a devotee of tea, and when I went to Peace Corps in Nepal. So I came back and I started to do research in tea after my 2 years in Nepal, and I said, I want to know about the history of tea. And so everybody said, it's from China, all the tea in China and that stuff. And so 5,000 years of tea in China. Okay, that's what all the reference books say. The encyclopedias, they still say it. But, then I got into sinology. And then when you're a sinologist, you become very critical. You become a philologist. That's what a sinologist is, a philologist who specializes on China. So the more I studied the history of tea in China, I found that this claim that it went back 5,000 years was bogus. There was no good, solid evidence that tea was drunk 5,000 years ago in China. Then that's purely mythological. That Shennong, the divine farmer, who's a mythical figure, was said to have tasted 72 plants. And 72, by the way, is a magic number. Don't believe it. Saddam Hussein had 72 palaces. And so many things in the world are 72 in number because it has to do with the zodiac, 12 times 6, 72. So anytime you come across something sacred that says there are 72 of them, take it with a huge grain of salt. So Shennong was said to have tasted 72 plants and selected tea as one of them as being good for human beings. And that was 5,000 years ago. Of course, I don't believe that kind of a myth. And then there are a lot of myths and legends about the origins of tea in East Asia. And then there's another one about Bodhidharma, who was the first patriarch of Zen in China. And he's the guy who went to Shaolin Si, the area outside of Luoyang, and meditated against looking at a wall for 9 years. And he kept falling asleep when he was meditating. And you're not supposed to fall asleep when you meditate, because that defeats the purpose of meditation. So he got very angry with himself, and he plucked out his eyelids and threw them on the ground, and up popped tea leaves. And that's another famous legend for the origin of tea. And I don't believe myths, and I don't believe legends. So I said, I'd better do some very serious research on exactly when Chinese began to drink tea. It wasn't 5,000 years ago. And then I found, the more I looked at ancient texts, as late as the 6th century AD, Chinese thought that tea was a barbarian drink from the south. Southern barbarians drank tea. And it's very clear. I'm reading a text with my students, and I was this semester, Luoyang Qilanji. It's very clear that they looked down on the northern Chinese, people north of the Yangtze, really looked down on tea. So we don't have good evidence for Chinese drinking tea before then, before the 6th century. And I posit that Chinese started to drink tea generally because of a single person, a man, named, not totally by him, but he encapsulates the legitimization of drinking tea. And that's Liu Yang, who is the god of tea in China. And he's the author of a text called the Chajing, which means tea classic. He wrote that book between 760 and 762. And it was he who really said to Chinese, tea is good. It's not a Southern barbarian thing. It has all these excellent properties. It can do this for you. It can keep you alert. The Buddhists knew this. See, the Buddhists knew that tea would help keep you alert. And they were the propagation of tea in China was very much tied up with Buddhism. So where does tea come from? Botanically, tea comes from Southeast Asia. The botanical homeland of tea is the triangle in northeastern Burma, northwestern Laos, and southernmost Yunnan. And this was not Han area. The people who have the oldest relationship to tea are called Wa people. They're Mon Khmer speakers. Mon Khmer speakers are very, very ancient kind of people. They were in that area before Tibeto-Burmans were. Tibeto-Burman, China Sinitic is closely related to Tibeto-Burman. But Wa and Austroasiatic, Mon Khmer, they're related to India, actually, very, very ancient Indian. Long before the Aryans came, even before the Dravidians came, the Mon Khmer people have roots over 10,000 years ago in Southeast Asia, before the Tibeto-Burmans. So if you look very carefully at the word for tea in Chinese, it's either going to be a te word, like tea, or it's going to be a cha word, or it's going to be a chai word. Now, you all know chai, too, because chai definitely has become a word in English now. You can get it in Portland, Oregon, and it's very popular. Well, I wrote this appendix to the book, The True History of Tea. And because I think at heart I'm basically a linguist, or I have become a linguist for the last 20, 30 years. So I solved almost every problem that I was very happy with. But by the way, I'll show you some pretty pictures later on, but my students know when I start talking, I don't show pictures. I'm very different from an art historian or a true archaeologist. I don't show pictures until I have to. I talk. So I worked really hard to figure out where all the words in the world for tea came from, and I solved everything. But it was like a couple months before the proofs of the book were going to press, and it came out from Thames and Hudson, which is a very good press in England. And I was surfing the web, just looking around. I was in Uppsala, Sweden at the time, just looking around for additional evidence, because there were some things about my linguistic appendix that I was not quite satisfied with, such as where China got the word for tea from. So by chance, I just came upon a bowl from the Belitung Shipwreck, and it's a miracle, because it solved my problems. And it was like a month or two before the book was supposed to go to the final print. And I went out of my mind almost. And I told my co-author, Arling Ho, I said, look what I found, he said, it's too good to be true. It can't be true. And then I said, the Belitung Shipwreck is real. It wasn't salted at the bottom of the ocean. So this one bowl solved two major linguistic problems. And that's Michael Mao, if he's still here. Somebody said, how did you get interested in this? And it's because I was writing a book on tea. How did I get interested in the Belitung Shipwreck? And then I found this bowl. And you'll get to see this bowl, which is like an icon for me. It's so precious to me. It became the main theme of the book. I reworked everything to fit it in. So, usually when I give my lectures on the Belitung Shipwreck, I feel like I know more than anybody in the room about the Belitung Shipwreck. But in this audience, I know less than most people in the room know about the Belitung Shipwreck, but I know a lot more about that one bowl. Where's the... this is it. Okay. Which button do you push? Oh, the red button? Okay, got it. Okay. So there's Belitung. It's between Borneo and Sumatra. And I hope in the discussion period, maybe later, we can query Derek Hung, because why was the ship all the way over here if it's going to the Middle East? He gave a very convincing argument that the ship was going to the Middle East. But why was it all the way down here? That's a big mystery. And there aren't many Changsha wares in this area, as Derek told us. So then all of a sudden we get 60,000 Changsha bowls. I think it was off course. And we have to talk about why it was off course. Maybe I know a little bit more than some people have thought about that question. Going the wrong way. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about these matters because you know more about it than I do, many of you, the specialists in the room. That's what they looked like on the bed of the floor of the sea. There are some, the bowls nested just the way they were packed. There's very little writing on the bowls, and the writing is not that great. It's more just decorative ornaments on the bowls. Okay, when I first started lecturing on the Belitung Shipwreck, I would call that pseudo-Arabic. And I think a lot of people still do. But I got tired of it because I even tried to find Allah there somewhere because some people said it looks like Allah. But then I got my Arabic colleague to come in, and she looked at it every which way, and she said, it's not Arabic at all. She says it's just like these marks are just a continuation of these vegetal motifs. Well, I'm not going to call it pseudo-Arabic anymore because she couldn't read it at all. And that, she's a specialist on Arabic. Oops, there's some more. Well, then you get some very fine items like this. You have where high quality porcelains. not the changsha ware, which was mass produced. It must have been purely for economic, for trade. But these items look like they were probably for gifts of some sort. And maybe who made the case about the 824? That was you, Derek, right? Yeah, that maybe they were paying somebody back in the Middle East with very fine pieces. Whiteware. These are few in number. I guess about 300 of this very high quality porcelain, and green splashed ware. And this is very special. It was shown earlier today. It was not mentioned that this, and people who are specialists in this can correct me if I'm wrong, but this blue and white ware previously to this wreck had been known only from the Yuan dynasty. And that's 5 centuries later. So all of a sudden you get this kind of blue and white ware in China, in a Chinese ship, and it's 5 centuries before you would expect it. Now, another thing about this is the mineral that's used to produce this blue comes from the Middle East. So it had to come from the Middle East, be made into this plate in China at that early date, and then it was being shipped back to the Middle East. Then you get other items that are high quality, valuable items, like silver box with these, I think, Central Asian motifs or Sasanian. And then a glass bottle, which is apparently Roman glass. So it had come to China and then getting shipped back. And there are some bronze mirrors, some of which were already very antique by the time they were in this. So they were heirlooms that they got into the ship. And we heard a lot about gold objects. And I had the unique pleasure of being in Xi'an at the moment they excavated another one just like this. It's identical. They must have had a template. And I held it in my hand in the Xi'an Archaeology Institute. And I actually saw that one before I saw this one. But I remembered what was on it. And they're musicians, and they're playing Central Asian instruments. Like, I'm trying to see if I can get the right one. That's a biwa, a pipa, and that is essentially an Iranian instrument, barbat, which is like an oud. Okay, so I was on a quest to get that bowl in my hands, and I would have done anything to see it close and hold it. And my wish was fulfilled. There I am. I feel like I'm holding something worth $20 million in my hands. So I'm very careful. And this was in the storehouses where it was being kept in, I don't know how many of you have seen this, before it got in a museum in Singapore. And there were guards with machine guns outside protecting it, because there was a time, I don't know if this came up here, the Bellantoni Shipwreck, there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. I'm not going to go very deeply in it, and it's not proper for me to do so here, and I just don't want to. But I was actually very much involved at this vortex of a debate over the showing of the Belitung artifacts. I don't know if you're aware that they were supposed to be shown at the Smithsonian. And Smithsonian had a catalog. It was all ready to go. And then some people at the Smithsonian Institution lobbied against it at the last minute. And so it became a very public thing. And I spoke very strongly in favor of showing these objects everywhere, anywhere, especially at a place like the Smithsonian. So I thought it was very sad that we did not get to see these. Now, that's all the more I'm so proud of Agnes because my former student, she brought them. I don't know if she didn't do it herself, but I think she probably had very huge amount to do with it that they came to New York. When they were denied the opportunity to be shown in our nation's capital. And I think that's a tragedy, but now it's a victory right here in New York. So you can be very proud of having access to these objects. But I won't even go into why they were so controversial outside of the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian thing, I just think it was petty jealousy among the curators. And people said they weren't properly excavated and so forth. I think that's nonsense because the people who excavated them did a very good job. Anyway, I got to hold this. And why does it mean so much to me? Because I'm a linguist. It's got 3 characters on it. There they are up close. Now, I've talked about this bowl all over the world. And if I am in an audience completely made up of Chinese who are literate, and I will say, read that. And I'm not going to do this with you because you're too dignified. But I sometimes will say, okay, everybody, real loud, read it off. And I'll go like a conductor. And they all say, 茶盏子, 茶盏子. And then I say, 错了, you're wrong. It is not 茶盏子. But everybody reads it that way. It's 图盏子. You see the first character, 原来如此. It has an extra stroke there. If it's 茶, that stroke should not be there. That character is 图, which means bitter weed. In other words, it's not something that you would think of as a refreshing beverage. It's something that might almost poison you, like what, camphor? Or it's at best it's some kind of medicine, okay? And so the first records we have of people drinking what might be tea in China are from Sichuan, Western Han. But the authentic texts for that say tu. They don't say cha. In fact, neither the sound nor the character for tea existed until 8th century AD. Neither the sound nor the character for cha existed until the 8th century AD. They were made up. Now, you know what I call this? I call it rebranding. You take a barbarian drink from the South, and the Buddhists popularized it. And don't forget, Liu Yang, the god of tea, the guy who wrote the tea classic, he grew up as an adopted child, an orphan in a Buddhist monastery. So he has a very strong Buddhist upbringing, background. And I actually personally think, I haven't proven this, but I think that he's the guy who probably wiped out that stroke and rebranded tea, came up with another character, totally new character. Because that was in 760 to 762. Now, why is this bowl so important? It's 826 or just shortly thereafter. Well, no, it was before 826 because there's a dated item, 826 on the ship. So this bowl would have had to be made before that to get on the ship. Now, all of this comes together really well in terms of dating, because Liu wrote the tea classic in 760 to 762. This bowl shows that as late as the early 9th century, people still hadn't caught on to the new character. They were still writing this newly legitimated drink with the old character. In fact, you can still find, even in as late as Ming Dynasty texts, you can still find some people writing cha with that character. Not very many, because by the Sung Dynasty, they're kind of weeding out the old character when they're referring to tea as a drink. So they're getting rid of it. So this was very, very important to me in terms of dating the acceptance of tea in China. It really helped me to pin it down to just around the time of Liu. And it fits with everything else in terms of the movement of tea from Southeast Asia to Sichuan, down the Yangtze Valley, down to Fujian, where there are tea, and then from Fujian up towards Shandong. And of course, in terms of environment, you can't really grow tea north of the Yangtze very well. You barely can grow it, except with global warming, maybe. But you could not grow tea north of the Yangtze, only kind of like pushing it ecologically. As a matter of fact, if you go to Yunnan, which is the southernmost part of Yunnan, place like where pu'er is grown, pu'er tea, that's really good tea in the south. The tea trees there are taller than this room. They might be twice as tall as this room. They're trees. So what do you see tea in the estates along the Yangtze are shrubs, bushes like this. That's for two reasons. They trim them to be that way, but also they're at the border of their ecological limits. Tea is a tropical or semi-tropical plant, so it really shouldn't be growing very far in the north. Now, this bowl is also very important in terms of the linguistic environment in which tea was drunk. It says bitterweed or cha, tea, bowl, and then it's got this little thing at the end, which says noun suffix. It says tea, bowl, thingy. It's telling you this is now that tells you for 100% sure that this is a vernacular term. It's not classical Chinese. If you're saying it in classical Chinese, you would just say cha jan. That's it. But as soon as you get the cha janzi, you're dealing with middle vernacular. That's very important in terms of the social milieu in which this was being drunk. And also the religious milieu. Because I told you that Bodhidharma, he didn't pull out his eyelids and make tea, but he probably was involved with the Buddhist movement to provide tea in the afternoon to keep you awake. The Buddhist monks do not drink they do not eat afternoon. So when they're doing their meditation sessions in the afternoon, they need something. And tea has two purposes. It keeps them from feeling the pangs of hunger, and it also keeps them alert so they can read their sutras and they can meditate properly. So tea and Buddhism just go along together so well. And also, Buddhism came from southeast, right? So it's also, that's where tea came from. Now, we have specifically what kind of Buddhism? Zen, Chan, dhyana. Chan is just the word, the Chinese transcription of the Sanskrit word dhyana, which means meditation. Chana is really just the same thing. Chana, meditation. So it was particularly the Zen Buddhists, the Chan Buddhists, who, Zen is just the Japanese pronunciation of that same character. They're the ones who really pushed tea the hardest because they needed it to stay awake. And they used this kind of expression in their, you know Zen koans, right? Those where the master hits the guy on the head and says, "Go drink tea." They actually said that. Go drink tea. He might hold up a tea bowl, and not the master, the Zen master, hold up a tea bowl, not say anything. And that's some kind of message. But when they referred to that thing they were holding, they referred to it this way, not in classical. In fact, some of our earliest textual evidence for, we have very poor evidence. Well, I got to watch the time. What time am I supposed to stop? Now? 5 more minutes. Okay. Okay. Our earliest textual evidence for Middle Vernacular, most abundant textual evidence, aside from the Dunhuang manuscripts I worked on, definitely in Zen, in Chan. That's where you can find a lot of it, like dialogues between a master and a disciple. They're speaking a lot of this kind of vernacular. Vernacular means spoken language, Koyu, not classical Chinese, which is dead, only on the books. Classical Chinese is not spoken. It's only written. This kind of language can be spoken. Now I'm going to go galloping. So just showing you some more of these bowls, swastikas on probably a stupa. There's the trigrams in another mirror. This is how they were packed. So it was a commercial enterprise. They really knew how to pack things. And that tea bowl, just a miracle. There's only one. And I don't know how or why somebody decided to put it on the web for Victor Mair to see. I wish I knew who. I owe that person $50,000. I'd give it to him right away. And that's where this temporary storeroom for the Belitung materials were kept in Singapore before they decided, can we even show them in Singapore? That's long before the Smithsonian problem. This is what I was privileged to go into the storerooms. And here I am, proudly talking before the Southeast Asia Ceramic Society about my bowl. And the gentleman on the side is the person who gave me the privilege to look at that and hold it. Now, I'm going to real fast through these because commercially, I'm just going to say this. We would not have Donald Trump as our president if it weren't for Tea Party. We had American independence because of tea. True. We would not have America without tea. We would not have Donald Trump without the second Tea Party. And then why do you have these tea parties? Why do we have the Boston Tea Party? Because economics, taxes. China was draining the world of silver. Then we had an opium war. Oh, man. China was exporting tea to Tibet and to the Uyghurs for horses. So the economic impact of tea is enormous, enormous. And China was very good at it, at selling tea. But that tea bowl is not a tea bowl that was being shipped to Middle East. Because the Middle Easterners were not drinking tea then. They wouldn't be drinking tea for many, many, many more centuries. So it says tea bowl, but I think it was just some guy doodling around. He wasn't serious because I don't think these bowls were intended to be tea bowls. They're just all-purpose bowls. He just wrote tea bowl. He wasn't commissioned to do that. He was just playing around. Okay, I'm going to go real fast. These are like the impact of tea in Europe, 17th, 18th, 19th century. This is like a Chinese teapot for the trade. And see what they've done, all these pictures, they have made Europeans looking like Chinese scholars. It's kind of funny, and it's also kind of risque if you look closely. That guy is leering. You see, he's trying to look like a Chinese gentleman, but he's looking at something. Can you see it? The people up close can see it. Oh, there he is, another view. Okay. Now, this is from the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, I think. Okay, so I'm going to end with this. This is the man who made tea drinkable, who made tea a beverage. That's Liu Yang. It's an inside painted stuff bottle. He's got his little boy there, getting the tea water ready to make tea. But that's, of course, that's much later. But we're paying tribute to him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Our next speaker is Liu Yang, who is head of the Department of Chinese South and Southeast Asian Art and curator of Chinese art at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Dr. Liu also serves as a member of the advisory committee for the China Center at the University of Minnesota. Before moving to Minnesota, he served as a senior curator of Chinese art at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney. He was concurrently an adjunct professor at the University of Sydney and the University of New South Wales. Since 1998, he's organized more than a dozen of traveling exhibitions from China and has published as many books on Chinese art and archaeology. 3 of his publications received awards from the Art Association of Australia and New Zealand for best catalogs. He is currently working on research, interpretation, publication, and exhibition of the MIA's outstanding collection of archaic Chinese bronzes. He was a contributing essayist to the Freer and Sackler Gallery's publication, Shipwrecked, Tang Treasures, and Monsoon Winds. Please join me in welcoming Liu Yang, Dr. Liu Yang.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the Tang Center for inviting me to join this wonderful gathering, and also allowed me to revisit my research on this topic, which was done 16 years ago. I still remember the excitement the first time I saw some 35,000 bowls from this shipwreck that were housed in the warehouse in Nelson, New Zealand. That was a long time ago. Now, my topic today is the decorative motifs on Changsha bowls from the Belitung Shipwreck. The excavation of the Belitung Shipwreck is significant for the study of Changsha ware, as the ceramic cargo is dominated by bowls of some, as I mentioned earlier, 55,000 pieces manufactured in Changsha kilns. All those bowls are decorated in a wide range of freely painted designs in colorful underglaze, including vapors, clouds, or spirals, foliage, flowers, landscape, animals, and poems. vapors, clouds, or spirals. In 733, a Tang poet, Meng Haoran, wrote the following lines when he wandered through the low hills of the Yunmeng marshes, gazing at the Dongting Lake, only a short distance to the north of Changsha. In the eighth moon, the lake is calm. The water and the sky blend into one. Vapors rise from the Yunmeng marshes, and the waves leapt at Liu Yang's wall. Such was a description typical of the medieval poets who wrote about the scenery around the Dongting Lake, a region within the boundaries of the historical Chu state, whose climate was noted for its unusual natural phenomena. Vapor and cloud were common in this comparatively low-lying and well-watered terrain. The pervasiveness of the vapor and cloud motifs commonly seen in decorative arts arises not only from its natural quality, but also its cultural associations. From at least the 3rd century BC, the region was a destination for political exiles. Losers in factional struggles were sent from the court as a punishment. During the Tang, poets often spoke of the region as a place of melancholy, where the pervasive vapor appeared, dense and poison. It became a metaphor for the miserable future of displaced man. Such natural phenomena became the basis of a ubiquitous motif in the decoration of Changsha bowls, perhaps suffused with poetic overtones. The motif is striking for its unconventional form and for its evocative rhythm and movement. The frontally painted motif changes form constantly. At times it appears like steam rising from the valley, like this one. And at other time, it looks like a fleecy cloud floating by. There are two basic designs, a mushroom-like head and a spiral of different forms. Using these two principal forms, the Changsha craftsmen created numerous witty variations. First is a kind of a mushroom head with a long curving tail. And the second, a mushroom head upon a spiral. The third form, several mushroom-like clouds superimposed one upon another, forming a design resembling what Chinese call the lingzhi or fungus. And the number 4, combination of several mushroom-like heads and spirals. Whatever the variations, all are organic and living forms charged with energy, which are reminiscent of the pervasive yunqi or vapor motif seen on such pieces as the lacquerwares of the late Warring States period and the early Han, Western Han dynasty. In executing these decorations, one can visualize the rapid arm and brush movements of the artisans. Speed of execution certainly relies on individual artisan skill and personality, but in this case, the fluency was also inspired by motifs and was probably influenced by contemporary calligraphy, especially by so-called wild cursive style or script. This association is supported not only by the spontaneity and rhythm these calligraphy works possess, but also by the fact that Changsha was the home to a very famous calligrapher Huai Su, known as the Wild Monk, one of the most famous calligraphers in this cursive style. Calligraphy on the rediscovered Changsha bowls share the same style and the spirit as Huai Su's wild cursive script, as you can see this one, which was also from the Belitung Shipwreck. foliage. On Changsha bowls, botanic motifs, particularly the foliage and the floral designs, take up by far the largest part of the decorative repertoire. Although there appear many variations ranging from simple patterns to more complex designs, the repertoire of compositional elements is not large. The basic motif is a cluster of foliage resembling radiating beams. This could well be stylized illustration of shrubs and trees. In some cases, however, the tips of the middle firm, In some cases, however, the tips of the middle firm plants curled to form a hook-like feature, resembling the tip of a young fern. The motif therefore looks more like the foliage of herbaceous plants. Complex groupings consisting of several clusters of foliage developed out of the original simple design, as illustrated by these three bowls. There's no doubt that the Changsha craftsmen derived their designs from actual plants. They draw on various types of shrubs and trees in decoration, as is evident in the extant examples from the shipwreck, like this one. However, most of the designs of the foliage motifs are stylized in such a way that they have been converted into fictional foliage. The motifs are essentially organic, but are executed with free brushwork, unconcerned with imitating nature. Again, the influence of contemporary calligraphy is felt when one looks at those designs. The foliage was painted with quick, decisive touches of a brush. The fluidity of brushwork reached a high standard only matched by the cursive style of the contemporary calligraphers. Floral patterns. On Changsha bowls, a few designs are naturalistic depiction of real flowers, but the majority of the floral patterns are highly stylized, recalling the decorative patterns prevailing for thousands of years in China. The most common stylized floral design is a discoidal form with 4, 5, 6 or more petals arranged like the downward perspective of a flower in full bloom. The Changsha potters seem to start with the simple pattern of 4 petals, but soon they fancifully added more petals and further embellished the whole design with all sorts of adornments. The areas between petals were supplemented with spirals, tendrils, or small petals. Starting with the simple rosette, more complicated designs were derived from grouping of more petals. In the most elaborate examples, a 4-petal rosette was embellished with spirals, petals, and other abstract elements, forming a design that looks like a rosette placed within a square, like this 2 illustrated. Some floral forms became highly abstract, although the movement of lines and arrangement elements are still reminiscent of treatment accorded with originally to the organic form. They have lost every invisible connection with the vegetal form. Here, abstract and geometric characteristics played a major part. Although the stylized floral rosette was one of the most popular patterns in Tang decorative art, a form that has its origin at least in the Warring State period in 4th to 3rd century. The abstracted floral rosette was really unique. They appear to have been first introduced by the artisans of the Changsha bowls. landscape. By the 8th century, the interest of artists in China had begun to shift from man to nature. In an earlier period before the Tang Dynasty, people comprised the main subject matter for art, and the landscape constituted no more than incidental background. Now it began to be depicted for its own sake. The flourishing of landscape painting as special genre during the Tang Dynasty was reflected in the decoration of changsha bowls. Several examples to attempt a realistic representation of nature scenery, as you can see in these two bowls, also from the shipwreck. Although simply executed, mountain ranges in this picture were truthfully painted in fine outline without using texture strokes for modeling terrain and cliffs. Solitary trees grow from peaks and emerge from ravines, suggesting forested ranges. A few waving strokes on the foreground represent the water. It is interesting to see that the models that inspired the decoration of changsha bowls were not certain well-known contemporary works, as you can see from this painting, attributed to two most well-known Tang Dynasty painter of late 7th and early 8th century, or probably a copy of the late period of these two artists' work. But what we can see from the changsha bowl, the landscape they painted, the model, rather earlier ones. The way that the trees are depicted larger than the hills is reminiscent of landscape painted by a very earlier artist such as Gu Kaizhi, the earlier 5th century painter. Changsha potters seems to be more interested in abstract mountains. In these stylized landscape compositions, the mountain contours were brushed in quick, decisive touches. The principal pattern was a mountain range rising and falling in the distance, featuring a central towering peak flanked by smaller ones. Vapors cloud gather around the mountain's peaks. Below the mountains are hidden in mists in the form of stylized scrolls. Such imagery is not only a reflection of natural phenomena, but also an echo of a long-standing tradition. Chinese have always looked on mountains as visible embodiment of mysterious natural forces. One of the most important powers attributed to the Great Mountain in China was their ability to produce mystery clouds. The 2nd century BC depictions on the coffins from Ma Wangdui, also from Changsha, vividly demonstrate such a belief. Although this form of landscape imagery had a naturalistic inspiration, in many examples the nature motifs were stylized or abstracted in such a way that the suggestion and the evocation replaced the direct description. Now, I have to just quickly mention that what Professor Mair had discussed, that many Chinese scholars had believed this kind of depiction is actually the Arabic phrase, meaning Allah is the greatest. But from what I showed in this previously, that they are apparently the abstract landscape rather than Arabic inscriptions. Fish and birds. A rare group of changsha bowls from the Tang wreck is interesting because of the use of a certain fish motif. These are not an ordinary species of fish. They appear to have grotesque heads and with large glaring eyes, wide-opened mouths, and sharp teeth. This creature was not unfamiliar to the people of the Tang dynasty. Its macra, a motif introduced from India. In the Indian myth, macra is the vehicle of Varuna, the deity of the oceans. From the 3rd century BC to 12th century, macra was one of the popular decorative motifs in Indian art. The earliest mentioning of macra in Chinese translation of Buddhist sutra dates back to the 4th century. It is interesting to note that the Chinese perception of macra seems to emphasize its aggressive nature. In Chinese Buddhist texts dating from 5th to 9th century, the macra was often referred as a fierce creature that destroyed ships, harmed voyagers, and engulfed everything. Such a belief is illustrated by a depiction on a bow from the shipwreck, as some speakers had shown this before. It is apparent that the popularity of the macra image spread with the Buddhist doctrines. The association of the motif with Buddhism in the Tang dynasty is made clear by the adornments embellish the macra on Changsha bows. Beside the patterns such as waves and clouds, a flaming centimani jewel is sometimes depicted as if the fish is chasing after it. The popularity that also showing the macra motif depicted on other mediums of work, as you can see here in the silver plate with the gilt. The popularity of Buddhist belief in the region is also attested by frequent use of some other decorative motifs on Changsha bows that associated with Buddhism. For instance, pagoda, and that one of the bow, and the swastika. Despite its exotic flavor and the Buddhist association, perhaps the popularity of the macra motif was due to its grotesqueness, signifying a supernatural force with talismanic qualities. Among the animal motifs on the Changsha bows, the bird occupies a predominant position. Although shown in variety of posture, the majority of birds decorated on the bows from the Bellantoni Shipwreck are seen flying. Although in some bows bird motifs were painted solidly, the patterns of clouds, spirals, and foliage were added in many examples as background, suggesting that the birds were in mid-air. One of the most charming images of the bird is a depiction of its profile standing on one foot while the other is raised, stretching forward. One other picture of the bird is unique because it depicts a peacock with the small back with the long tassels holding its mouth. The image appears to be a vivid combination of realism and imagination. During the Tang dynasty, flower and bird painting come to form a distinct school of art. The third major genre of painting in addition to landscape and figure painting. The development of flower and bird painting during this period provided a creative spur for decorative art. This popular trend is reflected in the decoration of the Changsha bows. On the interior wall of one bow, as shown here, details are uniquely incised and carefully organized into the composition. Two birds, each flying in a distinct pose, are attracted by a spray of flowers depicted in between them. Heavy clouds float below. The design is unique because, except those surviving in the tomb murals, very few Tang paintings in this subject have emerged to testify to the style championed by the imperial court and the popular taste. This design, while still an earlier prototype in the flower and bird painting repertoire, exemplified the popularity of the genre during that time. There's a quite a similar example, also from the shipwreck. Poems. The Tang Dynasty marked the golden age of Chinese poetry. During this time, poetry became more than a literary form, loved and not only for its enchantment, but also because it was a path to wealth and success, because of the establishment of the civil service examination system. The ability to compose verse was now an absolute requirement for high office. The flourishing of poetry inspired Changsha craftsmen to turn poetry into a decorative medium. The most common form of poetry found on Changsha bowls was the 5-character form. This corresponds to the fashion of the time. The majority of poems seen on Changsha bowl seems to be folk songs. A fragment bowl from the Tang Shipwreck, showing here, bears a poem in the 5-character style. The poem is incomplete due to damage to the bowl. However, it is not difficult to reconstruct the poems on the basis of similar poems found elsewhere in Changsha. The poem may be translated, it's my only translation. Every day I pond over my journey ahead. Every morning I bid farewell to my master. Hiking amidst mountains and rivers, everywhere I hear birds twittering new songs. The sorrow of parting is expressed in one other poem written on an intact bowl from the Tang Shipwreck. That reads, again my translation, "How far is the southern sky in the eyes of a lone wild swan? The chilly wind strikes terror into one's heart. I miss my beloved who is traveling afar, beyond the great river, and my heart flies to the frontier morning and night." This piece is rather significant because the poem has never been seen before amongst some 80 to 90 distinct poems found today on the Changsha ware. There are some poems expressing the joy of seasons and admiring nature. One unique example that is also unseen elsewhere reads, "This year, this night is drawing to an end. The stride of the approaching year and the day can be heard. Gone with this night, the winter chill. Spring creeps in with the dawn." One other inscribed poem are viewable only partially. The spring ponds are full of spring rain. In spring, the spring grass sprouts. The incomplete poem again can be reconstructed in light of the same poem inscribed on an intact ewer excavated at Changsha and one other ewer in the Hunan Provincial Museum's collection. So it reads, again, my translation, "The spring ponds are full of spring rain. In spring, the spring grass sprouts. Spring people gather to sip spring wine. Spring birds sing spring songs." In conclusion, the variety of motifs and the spontaneous brushwork secured important position these Changsha bowls in the history of Chinese decorative art. The ties of many motifs with the contemporary belief and aesthetics made them even more significant and charming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liu Yang, for introducing all those beautiful bowls to us. Please bear with me for a minute. We need to do some camera adjustment, I understand, and then we'll be back in a minute.
Where's the presentation?
It's done.
Okay, we're ready to start again. I think a number of people have taken a break and are in the back, but I know we need to stick to our schedule. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker. Francois Louis is Associate Professor at Bard Graduate Center, studies in the decorative arts, design, and culture. His research focuses on the art and material culture of the Khitan Liao dynasty in northern China, but also ranges more broadly across the history of Chinese artifacts, including topics from early antiquity to the 18th century. His publications on China's antiquarian culture, the history of ornament, and on gold and silver include the book Goldsmithing of the Tang and Song Dynasties, which I'm not going to pronounce in my terrible German pronunciation, which examines the formation of the goldsmithing profession in China. Professor Louis served as editor of the scholarly journal Artibus Asiae from 2002 to 2008. His most recent book and exhibition is Design by the Book, Chinese Ritual Objects, and the Sanli Tu. This was is now on exhibition at the Bard Graduate Center, and the book was published in 2017, just published. Professor Louis also contributed an essay to the Freer and Sackler's Shipwreck, Tang Treasures, and Monsoon Winds, and this afternoon he is going to speak to us about gold and silver. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you very much, Adriana. And thank you, Agnes, and the Tang Center, as well as the Asia Society, for the invitation. So as you know by now, a substantial amount of Tang gold and silver was reported from the Belitung wreck. This is how it works. This includes 7 gold vessels. So these are all the gold objects that were found on this shipwreck. 7 vessels. There are 2 of these dishes, one of which you see at the exhibition, a round dish, 3 oblong bowls, 2 of which are the same, decorated, and one that's undecorated. This one is also in view. The much talked about hexagonal cup, a bracelet that's intact, and 2 fragments of 2 different bracelets. There was about 2 kilograms of gold foil, and this tiny thing that's Javanese gold currency, it's known as a piloncito. That's about 2.5 grams of gold. It's currency. It's like a coin, except it's not flat. It's round. The find also included about 24 silver vessels and 18 silver ingots. I show you 2 ingots and selection of these silver vessels. I'll talk a few in a second. The silver ingots, as far as I know, all looked the same and were all about 2 kilograms in weight. That accounts to 50 liang, 50 ounces, which was a standard weight in the Tang period at the time. So the silver was quite corroded in many instances and does not look as splendid as the gold. But we can still get a good sense of the style and the high quality of craftsmanship. And we can see that the vessels form a homogeneous group that was made around the same time and place, certainly in southern China in the Jiangnan region, and presumably in the 820s, 830s, or thereabouts. Let me show you some details of the better preserved pieces. A number of the small boxes survived in good condition because they were in these larger silver boxes, which are very corroded. I don't know the exact number of these small cosmetics or medicine boxes that were found, something like a dozen. They're all decorated with relief decoration on the lid and then a flat chase decoration on the bottom. There were also large platters that were found. I've never seen the actual platters. When I was working on this 10 years ago, I got an X-ray. So from that, you get a bit of a sense of what these platters look like. This one also has macara decoration, just like Liu Yang showed us in a large silver platter a few minutes ago. So I don't know the status of the conservation of this. Presumably, they've been conserved now and maybe look more splendid than this X-ray. And here is the large bottle that was also in bad condition. The lid was, the neck was broken, and the back side of it is covered still in corrosion. So there's, this is like the only good angle of the object, of which I have a picture where you see something of the decoration. So this find is significant, not only because it is the earliest shipwreck with Chinese precious metals in Southeast Asia. It's also one of the largest Tang gold and silver finds ever. It's the 4th largest gold find, in fact, and the 3rd largest silver find if you measure this based on weight. I want to briefly introduce the other large finds to give you a context to gauge the economic and social significance of these Belitung finds, which is basically my main objective in this talk. And then we can, we'll add in a way to Derek Heng's talk that we've heard this morning. We can continue spinning his narrative about how the shipwreck might have traveled and what kind of people might have been involved in the transactions in China. Discoveries of Tang gold objects are indeed exceedingly rare. This isn't surprising because gold was extremely expensive, on average 10 times the value of silver, sometimes and in some places even up to 20 times. The greatest amount of Tang gold and silver ever found comes from a treasure hoard in Pinglu in Shanxi province, was found in 1971 and is quite unknown. This find consisted of 82 ingots of various shapes, 82 belt ornaments, and over a dozen bracelets, altogether weighing some 33 kilograms. There was no silver in this hoard. So this is more than 7 times the amount of gold on the shipwreck, and like 4 times the amount of the second largest gold find that we have. Who could have owned this kind of truly extraordinary gold and silver treasure? Fortunately, there are inscriptions on some of these objects. One identifies an ingot as belonging to a duke, Zhang Tongru, and another mentions the date 758. We know this Mr. Zhang from the historical record. He was one of An Lushan's chief strategists who was active throughout An's famous rebellion. And it thus seems likely that this gold was loot from the Tang capitals, which were plundered in 756 and 757. I presume part of that loot was gold jewelry and other objects. These were melted down and made into these ingots, and then probably hidden as the rebellion started to falter in the 760s. So we have a large find, and we got some sense of who might have been involved in this type of wealth. The fact that this Pinglu treasure included bracelets is interesting, and it points to the widespread use of gold jewelry at the time as a store of wealth. It can also be related to the bracelet and bracelet fragments from the Belitung wreck. I think this suggests that those 2 fragments here, they may not be accidental. Since gold doesn't decay, even underwater in salt water, it's probably more likely that these are remnants of bracelets that were cut on purpose and used as a form of payment, like some of the gold ingots in this Pinglu hoard. The next largest find may also have been buried as a result of the An Lushan rebellion, but in this case, it was presumably to safeguard it from the rebels. It contained twice as much gold and 3 times as much silver as the Belitung find. And while we do not know the owner of this Hojiacen treasure, we can tell that it was a high-ranking courtier, possibly a nobleman, given the exclusive Chang'an neighborhood it had been buried in. There were 30 gold and 421 silver coins. Here's one example of it. These were gifts that the emperor was giving out personally to favored courtiers. And their presence, to me, confirms the high status of the owner of this treasure. But we don't know who it might have been. It might have been a wealthy foreign merchant. It might have been a courtier. It had also interesting, a very similar, about 2 kilograms of gold foil as we found on the shipwreck. 11 gold vessels, the shipwreck had 7, so even though it weighed a little more, it's not that different. Had a lot of silver, on the other hand. Silver had a lot of silver ingots of various strange shapes, at a time when silver ingots were not quite standardized in the way they should be shaped. Undecorated vessels, very sophisticated vessels, cups of various shapes and designs. Some look Central Asian, some look very Chinese. This hoard is very famous. and is known to exemplify the early Tang silversmithing tradition. The objects date from the late 7th and the first half of the 8th centuries. And as the large amount of silver bullion shows, silver by that time was recognized as a store of value, even if the ingots do not show standardized designs yet. This is something new when we're talking about silver. Gold has long been recognized as a standard of wealth in China, but silver really only started to take on this type of function in the 7th century. And this kind of embrace, this Tang embrace of silver, was largely a response to Central Asian and Inner Asian custom, where this material was widely used and circulated, both for vessels as well as currency. It was largely mediated into China through Sogdian traders in the 7th century. Silver became even more widespread as a means of payment for large sums after the Anlushan rebellion in early 760s. At the time, fine silks became scarce. Fine silks were the usual way of paying high amount sums. But as I said, silver is starting to take over that role. That doesn't mean silks went out of use, but there's sort of a new high-value material being introduced. Silver is quite different from silk as a high-value payment because silver was mined privately and it circulated both as vessels and ingots. It necessitated continual weighing and assaying. This kind of task was performed not by the government, but by professional silversmiths. It was these specialist assayers and craftsmen who, over the course of the late 8th and 9th centuries, formed the first private banking system and private banking institutions in China. The Tang silver shops were simple banks that would change silver into cash. They would broker the sale of gold and silver, and they would act as safe deposit firms. They did not yet give credit or invest as they would in the Song dynasty about 200 years later, though. Still, silver by the late 8th century had become widely accepted as a high-end commodity and had spread well beyond the foreign diaspora into use in wide upper-class segments of society. The third massive gold and silver find is the Pagoda deposit of Faman Temple. We've seen a little bit of that, also mentioned earlier this day. It gives us examples of silver used by the imperial family. Notably, Emperors Yizong and Xizong between the 850s and 874 when this pagoda deposit was closed. It also includes ritual objects that were commissioned by the most highly positioned eunuchs and the Buddhist clergy in the early 870s. Here are several of the gold objects. Some are reliquary caskets, alms bowls that were used in the worship of the Buddha's fingerbone relics that were stored at this temple. The temple itself was sponsored and supported by the court. So we know quite a lot about this find because it was accompanied by an inventory and a history as well, written in stone in the crypt. So altogether, I counted 8 objects out of gold, ritual objects, weighing about 5.2 kilograms, and there were 113 silver objects weighing 60 kilograms or thereabouts, mostly manufactured objects rather than ingots or gold foil. There was none of that. Some of the 121 gold and silver objects were manufactured in the imperial workshops in Chang'an, but the majority was commissioned from private silversmiths in various parts of the country, including the Jiangnan region, which had become the main Chinese silverworking center in the 9th century. Actually, there were, by the way, talking about cloves, there was also a large amount of cloves that was donated to this treasure. I want to show you one example of these Jiangnan manufactured silver boxes or silver objects, which is a silver box used by Emperor Yizong himself when worshipping the famous Buddha finger relic. We know that this box had earlier been a gift to the emperor from a top official whose name is Li Fu, who died in 877. It was one of thousands of silver objects of this type that late Tang emperors expected to receive as gifts, mostly from their high officials in southern China. Such respectfully presented gifts, they are called respectfully presented because that was one of the standard inscriptions that they had. So such gifts were part of an imperial revenue system that was entirely separate from official tribute and official taxation. These were gifts that were given for birthdays, for various holidays during the year, and they ended up in the emperor's private storeroom, which is sometimes called Neiku or the Daiyinku. And this box has the Neiku inscribed on the bottom as well. So we know quite a lot about the history of this box. We know about its provenance, and we know how it got to come into the emperor's possession. We don't know when exactly it was made or when this took place, but comparing it stylistically, this might have been as early as the 850s. When Li Fu was at the height of his power already. What's interesting to me is that the box's design and craftsmanship is comparable to the Belitung gold. Although the imperial box was made a few years later, it shows similar motifs as the gold dishes, the one that we've seen so many times in particular. It shows the knots, and it also has similar floral designs. If I go back. Well, this is probably too small to see, but there are flowers on the side here that are really very similar to these flowers. And you might be able to make out this identical motif as this knot here. There's also an imperial collection of these two dishes. If you look more carefully at the design itself, there is the swastika motif in the center, and then there are the four knots on the outside. You can read those. The swastika is read as one. The knots are shou. So if you read it as a rebus, you can read this as the imperial birthday wish, or the type of wish that a member of the imperial family would get for their birthdays. So there is an implied imperial use in the design itself of this vessel that links this up, perhaps, with this respectful gifting requirement of the 9th century officials to the court. So it means one shou, 10,000 years. The vessel itself doesn't bear any inscriptions like this box, for instance. So we don't have like final proof that it was in the possession of the court. But it seems to me that this kind of object was really designed as a gift for imperial birthdays. Whether it ended up being used as that is up to speculation. Regina Kral was mentioning these wares yesterday as well. We see the same kind of inscriptions on some ceramics. The green glazed ceramics from the shipwreck there's one that has the inscription of Ying, as if it was made to be shipped to the court. And there's one that has an inscription, Jinfeng, presented respectfully. Again, that's code for being requisitioned as an imperial gift. So were they or were they not at the court? I think they were probably intended to be in any case. Perhaps like the gold pieces that ended up on the ship, these things never made it to the court. And they somehow were siphoned out of the cycle. We don't know. But perhaps they were for the court, and the emperor regifted them, or some of his all-powerful eunuchs did that without the emperor's knowing. We know from the historical records for sure that imperial regifting and court corruption had reached extraordinary levels at the 820s. The largest such distribution of imperial wealth is recorded for 826, not too long before the Belitung shipwreck set sail. Emperor Jingzong at the time presented deserving subjects with some 4 metric tons of silver and nearly 300 kilograms of gold. This kind of generosity required massive gifts for the emperor beforehand, some of which were also recorded. Between 824 and 827, Governor Wang Bo of Yangzhou, for instance, sent over 5,900 silver vessels to the profligate teenage Emperor Jingzong. Similarly, the governor of nearby Runzhou, that was Li Deyu at the time, was ordered to send silver boxes weighing nearly 1 metric ton in 824. Li left a memorial where he complains that this order went far beyond the resources of his prefecture and that he had to actually go buy silver elsewhere, and he went to the marketplace in Yangzhou where he obtained that silver. Li Deyu, by the way, also commissioned a Buddhist reliquary that very same year, and this reliquary survives and was discovered in 1960s. You see here the outer box of it. It compares very closely to the Belitung silver vessel is in style, and I think it is one of the ways you can identify this Belitung silver as coming from the Jiangnan region and falling into this style of the 820s. Certainly your lower Yangtze style. Here's another comparison to a Belitung object. I'm sorry, I didn't anticipate the screen to be so small, but you can see the same kind of plant and flower motifs as you see on this side of the silver casket. So looking at these comparable larger finds, we see that gold and silver in the 9th century was at the core of a network of wealth. It linked private mining, gold and silversmithing, and a fledgling banking system to the imperial court and the various elites close to the emperor, high government officers, high clergy, and the top eunuchs. What the Belitung find really confirms is that grand merchants, too, were part of this world in some way. Indeed, historical records mention figures like the Persian merchant Li Sucha as having contact with the court. They don't speak about merchants owning silver or paying in silver. So that's why this shipwreck is really quite an important additional piece of evidence in something that I guess seems kind of obvious, but still the traditional Chinese textual sources don't speak of it. They speak of Li Susha mostly because they want to make clear that the court was very corrupt at the time. Li, as we heard also this morning, in 824, presented Emperor Jingzong with enough fragrant agar wood to build an entire pleasure pavilion. This expensive imported wood was otherwise used only in small quantities, usually for incense or medicine. Li must have been in control of a large trading operation to be able to make such a valuable gift. He also must have been connected with influential eunuchs who arranged for what the stalwart Confucians at the time considered a very decadent gift. So a grand merchant could easily have bought gold and silver on the Yangzhou market, or he could have obtained it from the court in recognition of services provided to the emperor. We know that the young emperors in the 820s and 830s neglected government and that the court was largely controlled by powerful eunuchs at the time. But this does not necessarily mean that the precious metals on the Belitung wreck could not also have been provided by a high official who chose to invest his fortune in international commerce. That did also exist. Despite laws forbidding government officials to compete for profit, or even though overt trade remained disreputable for educated Confucian elites, it was nonetheless common for late Tang officials to invest heavily in business. Yangzhou, in particular, to use an assessment by Dennis Twitchett, had been packed with such official-owned enterprises since the 780s. And in the trading port of Guangzhou, as far away from the central government, it wasn't uncommon to have governors who openly enriched themselves on the maritime trade. Again, we've already heard the references to this type of corruption. Wang He, for instance, who held the position of governor from 795 to 801, is said to have sent 10 fully laden ships to the south each day. I guess that's in the 3 months when the winds blew south. And then when the winds blew north, he was recorded as having monopolized the purchase of all rare goods in the incoming ships. Others, such as Hu Zhang, 25 years later, was similarly engaged in private trading. He apparently accumulated enough wealth in just 3 years to buy and furnish several blocks of prime real estate in the capital. He didn't make it back to enjoy it, though. So one more point. While it's possible, even likely, that influential members of the Chinese elite owned and shared in the Belitung Cargo, the shipping and trading operation itself was probably overseen by a non-Chinese merchant, perhaps somebody like this Li Susha. The gold objects in particular hint at that. They suggest that they were not just made for gifting and feasting, but also served as merchandise at some level. If you look at their backside, they show weight inscriptions in Chinese, carefully chased by a silversmith. It's here, and here's an enlargement. But there are also engraved ciphers, possibly in a foreign script, and there are numerous scratch marks left by people who tested the gold for its purity. So there are all these scratches. 3 different ones. I think when these were restored, they made very certain that it's clear these are original scratches. These were not done after the objects were found. These were already there early on, and they left some sections, not on this vessel, but on another, untreated to show that these scratches were original. And here's one of these strange ciphers. It's engraved. It's not done by goldsmiths because you remove some of the gold when you engrave it. I don't know whether I'm holding this upside down, whether this is even a form of writing. It's definitely not Chinese. I'll show you another instance where you see this writing. I don't know, John, is this Malay? I don't know. Perhaps somebody in this audience has a good idea whether this is writing or whether these are just markings. They're certainly not coincidental signs. And again, they're scrape marks to check for gold purity. So we cannot say for certain when these marks were made, given that some of the vessels clearly were not brand new by the time they came on the Belitung ship. Like the undecorated vessel in the exhibition has a lot of scrapes and signs of use. So these were not brand new, at least that one wasn't. But the markings nonetheless identify the gold vessels as commodities, ultimately, and as stores of value. And as such, they were treated like other precious things on the wreck, the gold foil, the bracelets, and the silver ingots. They were high-value trade goods, both in China and in the international trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois, for that wonderful talk. I'm actually going to ask all of our speakers to come up to the table here in front to begin with. I'm so excited that we get to sit in front of this great stained glass window that really, with these globes that show the watery world that we've all been talking about. So, if we're to think of a common thread that links all three of this afternoon papers, I think one would be this notion of dissemination. And I think underlying Victor Mair's topic is the dissemination of tea to China and tea culture within China. And then, oh, I'm sorry. Do I need to start again? Okay, so I'm just talking about dissemination, the tie of dissemination among these papers. And I think that underlying Victor Mair's topic is the notion of the dissemination of tea to China and tea culture within China and beyond during the Tang period. Liu Yang discussed Chinese imagery of painting, calligraphy, and poetry on changsha wares, which were carried across vast oceans to distant lands. And Francois Louis told us about the networks of exchange that likely stretched from Chinese government officials to foreign shipping merchants. And of course, it comes as no surprise to us that dynamic trade took place during the Tang period. But what the Belitung Shipwreck and Cargo and these papers emphasize for us is the complexity and breadth of maritime trade in the mid-9th century. With this discovery, we see the inspired imagination and interest of scholars. And because of their work, we're beginning to see more clearly the impact of early globalization on cultures, arts, and how they evolved. I think something else that that connects everything that was spoken on this afternoon is language, whether that language is Chinese in the form of Chinese characters, or whether it's the language of design. And thinking about that language, that idea of language, all three of you spoke about decorative clues on Belitung Cargo. And I'd like to ask all of you if you think that that this decoration that we've been talking about might provide us with any inkling of who their consumers outside of China were or might have been.
You're asking that right now?
I'm asking that right now.
The decoration on the gold and silver is entirely in line with other decoration in China, so it's difficult to make any conclusions of what foreigners would have thought of it. There might be, the only thing that's unusual on this two square gold dishes, one of which you see there, is the border rim. I have not seen that on any other object at all. But whether that caters to a foreign taste or not, I can't say. So at least for the gold and silver, it's Chinese style gold and silver.
You had mentioned, I think you mentioned, I know that you didn't in your paper that I had read, that these were likely not just gifts and bribes, these gold works, but were also merchandise, clearly also merchandise. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit. What leads you to believe that that they were merchandise?
Well, largely it's these scrapes and marks on the back. People wanted to make sure this is real gold and it's got the purity standards that were expected. You don't do that unless you are concerned with value. So that was my understanding of these, or interpretation of the scrapes and scratches. And the other objects, a lot of them are just like these 18 silver ingots, which was half the weight of the cargo's silver. You can't really do much other than use them as merchandise or gifts.
Okay, yeah.
The gold foil, I think, is used as raw material for various kinds of goldsmithing works, gilding Buddhist statues and so on. It had interesting additional functions, and it's not currency in that sense, though.
But it could be possible, couldn't it be possible, just getting back to the gold and the scrapes on the back, isn't it possible that those pieces were on the market within China and then might have been taken on board and then used in the form of bribery? Yeah,
that's what I meant to say.
Okay.
I mean, at some point, they were merchandise when this was tested and scraped multiple times. But I think these objects shift as they move from one hand to another. Yeah, we don't know when exactly that took place.
I see a great contrast between these very high-priced items, which may have been for gifting, and they're limited in number. But what really is striking to me, the contrast is with these mass-produced bowls. That's a lot of bowls, 60,000, 55,000 bowls. And that would not be as suitable for gifts. Nobody could use that. I mean, your kitchen or your dining service does not need 55,000 bowls. They were selling them, and they could make a profit by selling them to that distance. And China must have had a reputation for making good quality of that kind of bowl, and it is worth investing some effort in the decoration, and a very imaginative decoration. I think you gave a very good analysis of what strikes me is there's no two decorations that are exactly the same. They're very spontaneous, they're very creative, very evocative. So I think some of the craftsmen, the artists, were just having fun sometimes. They were seeing how many different designs they could come up with to go with all this massive number of bowls. So I do think these bowls were being sold for commercial purposes at a long distance.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, Liu Yang, I don't know if you have anything to say, but I actually have a specific question for you.
Oh, okay.
If you want.
I'm not sure if the craftsmen who made those changsha bowls were aware that those were actually purchased by someone to ship to the Mid East, because the motifs, as Louis, Francois had mentioned, that it appears everywhere in different mediums of art, even the exotic mackerel, that fish appears in different silverware. So that, as you just mentioned, that sometimes they had fun. And I actually talked to you last night in front of two bowls. One was a very sophisticated depiction of bird, but the other was so naive. It looks like I said that it could be done by this craftsman's son, maybe, while visiting his father.
I think so. I wonder, though, because when we look at the gongxian wares, right, we can see those motifs like the lozenge motifs that, and I know we didn't look at any or specifically look at gongxian wares today, but there were some images of them that went up, and there are these lozenge motifs with the fronds which have their origins in West Asia and seem to be appealing to that kind of an audience. And when you were showing today those bowls, and I've kind of thought about this before as well, the changsha bowls that have what you were calling the rosette in a square decoration. Have you seen any other? I mean, I think you indicated that you hadn't seen another kind of version of that on any other objects in China.
This is a very, very good observation, because I haven't thought about that until this morning when John showed me that kind of squarish design. I wonder if there's any expression from that kind of design. I wonder if there's any link between this kind of squarish rosette with that design, because I really haven't seen this elsewhere in a Tang decorative art.
Which makes me wonder whether or not, in fact, those craftsmen were creating some objects to special order. I mean, clearly we know that among the changsha bowls, there are fewer of those that have the bird motifs or the makara motifs, those kinds of lozenge motifs, but you have a lot of those ones with the landscapes and the clouds and all that kind of thing, which may be more generically appealing everywhere. And I also think I've always wondered whether or not some of that changsha ware was bound for somewhere in Southeast Asia, even if there are not enormous finds of changsha ware in Southeast Asia, there are some finds of them. So clearly, some of it was being exported, and something like, motif like the mackerel, while it was popular in China, it was also really popular in Southeast Asia in a number of different places. Yeah, I think it's just something else to think about.
There was one specific motif that does not show in the bowl, but very often seen in the Yule. You have few in the exhibition,
Yeah.
which Chinese scholars name it Yezao, or kind of dates.
Dates.
Yes,
Yeah.
that does not appear in any other decorative art in during that time. It only appears in this type of ewer. So Chinese scholars suggested that it could be kind of, or influence, whether it's influence or kind of.
Made to order for
That's right,
that
yes,
audience.
yes.
Yeah. So for Victor, I really like, your whole story, and I actually do buy into it, but at the same time, I kind of want to play devil's advocate here.
Why don't you go ahead?
So I don't know if we can get the image of that bowl back up on the screen or not, but when you look at that bowl, right, you have your character, your Tu character, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's surrounded by clouds, and the clouds it's surrounded by are those clouds that are kind of those linger-shaped clouds, right? So
What kind of shape?
linger, like the
It's kind of spiral.
kind of like the root, like the magic
Oh,
mushrooms.
linger.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
So
fungus.
So since that is, at least certainly, I know later on in China, well, earlier in China too, that there's kind of that Taoist association there, as opposed to Taoist. Because of the medicinal or the longevity evoking qualities of linger fungus. It seems like it might have more of a Taoist association than a Buddhist association, and so if it has a Taoist association, and Tu is a medicinal tea that might have some, sort of medical proponents, could it be Tu?
I doubt it. but anyway, okay, so I have taught what I call a Buddho-Taoist seminar upon occasion. I don't know, maybe Agnes took it. I taught it about 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And so Buddhism and Taoism were very closely intertwined. But when I look at this bowl, as far as I know, it's unique, okay? There's only one bowl that says tea bowl on it. And I think it was this kind of whimsical, serendipitous that somebody wrote that. And I think I look upon those cloud motifs or the linger as this almost whimsical. They're just serendipitous, that almost like doodles, for in contrast to the tea bowl writing. But the writing is actually fairly intentional. It's fairly clear. I mean, they were trying to think of all sorts of different things to put on the bowls. They didn't want any two bowls to be exactly the same. But somebody, this would be very early, somebody drank tea. And because that expression, chajanzi, occurs a lot in Zen dialogues, and it doesn't occur in Taoist texts. So it was developing in a Chan environment. So the other cloud, the linger, the fungus or whatever it is, I think that was just decoration. The real message is and it's not even a very deep message. It's not like we're shipping 60,000 tea bowls to the Middle East. No. Because I told you, the people in the Middle East were not drinking tea. And neither were the people in Southeast Asia drinking tea. That's another point I didn't make in my talk. But I actually started my project, The True History of Tea, with the intention of demonstrating that tea drinking began in India, not China. And so I really thought tea is such an important part of Indian culture. And let me tell you, I'm going to use a real American vernacular term. I was really bummed out when I found no evidence for tea drinking in India before the 20th century. And that Indians essentially learned how to drink tea from the British. Unbelievable. Yes. I should know that. I couldn't even find a Sanskrit word for tea. I could not find a Sanskrit word. Now, what's extremely interesting, in Assam, tea grows naturally. But what did the Austroasiatics, what did they do with tea? I mean, what did they do with the tea plant, Camellia sinensis? They made fermented salad. And you can get it in Burmese restaurants, probably in New York. You can get it in San Francisco. They didn't drink it. The Chinese taught people how to make tea into a beverage and drink it. They taught people how to infuse it. So it's Buddhist, it's Zen, but it's not too closely connected with those Lingzhi. Would you agree?
I agree with you because this kind of motif, as I show in my lecture, that it's kind of a ubiquitous motif. It appears everywhere. It's just the most common, most popular motif see on the changsha bowl.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the floor now, Jenny. Oh, hold on. Let's just wait for the microphone to come around.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Jenny Liu. I wanted to ask about the function of these objects that you've talked about. For example, the bowls, there's so many bowls, as you say. So what would people at the destination point be doing with these bowls? Would you have any, not tea, for coffee? I mean, what would it be for? And then in terms of the silver and gold, I was just wondering, I mean, I haven't examined the pieces myself, but just looking at the pictures, it seems like there are degrees of fineness and roughness to the silver and gold. Like the earring and the bracelet is pretty rough, right? And then the plates are, some of them are very fine, but the Faminsi things, for example, are somewhat rough compared to the Hejiachun, right? So would you say that and you say that the Faminsi is sort of imperial culture, and so maybe with the ship it's imperial in the court, but maybe that was used more for ritual purposes, maybe being from the temple. So I was just wondering about that in terms of ritual and the fineness of the make, and then what the bowls were for. Thank you.
About 15 years ago, when I engaged in the study of those, I had spent several weeks in New Zealand, Nelson, when those works were stored in a warehouse. I looked at many bowls, although they all look the same, but they actually are different size. Some are small, some are large. You might think that they could be domestically used for, like rice bowl. However, but as that specific example show us, they were used for tea. I mean, like tea, chajans or tujans that you mentioned. But they definitely mean to use to be, as a kitchen utensil. But to that destination, I have no idea what they are going to use.
I think those bowls were all-purpose bowls, and I don't even think, you can use the bowl for soup, for noodles, for rice, for goulash, anything. So a bowl is just, you can have liquid in it, you can have a salad, anything. So I don't even believe this chajianzi was really a tea bowl, because I don't think the Chinese were drinking tea that much. They were in the South, perhaps. Maybe this one was a peculiar tea bowl, but the mass of those those bowls were just for general purpose, all purpose.
A question, Francois. You spoke of the gold work being principally.
I don't think people can hear you.
You spoke of the gold work being essentially imperial or associated with the elite in Xi'an and that area. What do we know about commercial workshops producing gold in the great port cities, Hangzhou, Yangzhou, for example? Were there commercial workshops producing gold work of a similar quality for merchant clients or local elite, quite independently of the people who were working and patronizing the court?
Yeah, we don't know a lot of detail about this, but we know that the court workshops hired craftsmen from the south. There were various centers we could identify, not just Yangzhou, but Yangzhou seems to have been a big production center. And yes, I think they worked for whatever clients could afford to buy these things from them. In terms of quality, to the Jenny's question, the objects at Provenance that look a bit rough are the ones that were made in the imperial workshops. The piece that I showed you that was sent from the south was really much more elegantly worked, and those were not court workshops in Yangzhou. So that much we know, but we don't have clear textual descriptions. What we have are these quotes or these stories that I mentioned of local prefects being forced into making things for the court. But the court left it up to them to find money to do that, and they went to whatever public crafts men were available, it seems. Is that the answer?
Go ahead, Brian.
So just wanted to make a comment on this subject of the end users and the value of the ceramics. We don't even have to speculate. Arabic texts from the 10th and early 11th century state quite clearly that they were used for cooking, for dining, and occasionally for display at state occasions. There's a nice article by Alain Georges, a recent one where he talks about ceramics, and there are some other references as well if anyone's curious. But one facet maybe that we could keep in mind is that while the designs of some of the bowls may have deliberately appealed to tastes in the Middle East, just the fact that these were made in China and the high reputation of Chinese wares among elites in Islamic lands, I think would have ensured a high sale value for them. It's a time where elites in those areas really have a great appreciation for these kinds of commodities. And they say so. There's a guy, Athalabi, who has a long passage where he praises the wares of China from ceramics to mirrors, describes them, and I can give you the reference if you like.
Thank you. There's a question in the back here.
I'm Cheng Yuan, a retired historian. I was curious about the gold, where the gold comes from. And I wonder, nobody discussed the anti-Buddhist persecution of Tang Wudi between 840 and 845. Could it be that some of the gold come from the monasteries, in other words, used for other purposes? And this would be a possible source, as well as some other valuable objects. With regard to tea, I'm thinking, this doesn't work. With regard to tea, I was just curious what did Chinese drink before Liu Yu?
Well,
After all, I mean,
I can
hot
tell you
water,
what they
gotta boil
drank
it.
in the Beiwei, Toba. They were drinking curds.
Like Mongols?
No, Toba.
Toba.
In Loyang,
I see.
Tabgach.
But that's supposed to be.
They were not drinking tea. They rejected tea dramatically. They would not drink it. They made fun of people who drank tea. And I'm talking about Loyang.
Okay. But you're not
You
talking
can-
about other places. You're not talking about other
Loyang was the capital.
In the Tang, it was Xi'an, wasn't it? I was just curious
No, but
about
I'm
my
talking.
ignorance.
Oh, of course. I talked about the 6th century,
Oh, okay.
and it was rejected. Now, we talked about Famansi several times. The first important tea set is from Famansi. Very elaborate, but it's imperial. And so this is at the stage when tea is just becoming popular. And it started from the high status.
The question about the gold provenance, there were various places in China where gold was mined or washed out of rivers, in Sichuan province in particular. There's gold in Yunnan. Guangdong had gold. But this gold in the Belitung ship predates the Buddhist persecutions, so
Yeah.
it can't come from the monasteries.
Okay, we have time for one more question here on the right-hand side.
Could we get some enlightenment on how did... Hello? Can we get some enlightenment? How did Chinese drink tea? Did they ever grind up the tea leaves into powder and whip it up? Or is that a Japanese version?
That's the way the Chinese drank it first. There's a tea grinder in Famansi, the same kind of tea grinder that you can see in wall paintings in Song Liao Jin. So yeah, they were whipping it, they ground it. Same way.
When did they start to drink it by infusing hot water on the tea leaves?
Well, you know, even if you make it into a powder, you have to use hot water. It's still a kind of drawing out the flavor and the properties of it with hot water. But they didn't use loose leaf, whole leaf tea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we'll take one more.
This is more tea. What exactly are curds?
Ah!
And in from a different kiln, there was something that looked like a cup set on top of a raised saucer. Would that have been a teacup? Could you hear
Who are
me?
you talking? Who are you talking to?
I can recite Little Miss Muffet.
Yeah, eating her curds in a way.
Curds from milk?
Yeah, they drank milk a lot. But also they drank alcoholic beverages, and that would make good sense. But they were unbelievably to all, it just doesn't seem to ring true for Chinese, that the Chinese were not drinking tea in the 6th, 5th, 4th centuries. They just started to drink tea in the 7th or 8th century. It's hard to believe.
So in terms of in the exhibition, for example, there are some examples of Xingware, Xing cups that sit on Xing stands, and there are certainly in Liao Dynasty tomb murals we see that type of cup being used for drinking tea. I imagine it could have been used for wine as well.
Certainly in the 9th, 10th, 11th century, you get a lot of evidence for tea drinking in China. Massive.
May I have the last word? And we're all going home and drinking tea or curds tonight. I think we can all agree that the Belitung Shipwreck was an extraordinary archaeological find. And I know I learned so much today from all our panelists and our two moderators. Thank you for sharing your scholarship. And And before we leave today, I do want to acknowledge our director of the Tang Center for Early China, Professor Li Feng, who just joined us for the afternoon panel. And to mention, invite all of you back, because our mission here at the Tang Center for Early China is to bring to light and bring scholars to come and share with all of you, all who are interested, new discoveries in Chinese archaeology, and to promote the role of archaeology as a path to understand, as a path to understand the past. And on that note, I do want to share something extraordinary with you. Francois, I'm not picking on you, but I noticed that according to your data, that the Famensi gold was totaling about 5.2 kilogram. And this was Tang Dynasty. And so Li Feng and I have been exchanging notes during the conference. And we want to share with you that recently there has been another extraordinary find from early China, since there are several of us who are early China people here, and that we're very proud of this recent archaeological find, which dates to 59 BCE in the Western Han. And this is a imperial tomb called Haihunhou. And in it had yielded 80 kilograms of gold. And I want to acknowledge that. And you can actually see some artifacts from this particular tomb at the Metropolitan Museum right now. It is on display for the Qing Han show at the Metropolitan Museum. And actually, we have one of the assistant curator of the exhibition here, so you can ask him questions. Pengliang Liu in the back, if you could wave at us. And you can go and see some of these extraordinary gold finds that predates the Belitung Shipwreck by 900 years. So I think we have another symposium in the making, Li Feng, on the Haihunhou tomb at some point, and we invite all of you and hope to see you back here again. Thank you so much for joining us.